tell you what, now that you've heard of it, you'll probably start to see it everywhere. truehempscience.com/macroaggressions. Links in the description. Use the promo code MACRO on your way out to save yourself a little bit of money. God knows we could use that these days. And anything that works to support the sponsors helps to support the show. You might, for those of you just listening in audio format, you're not going to notice this, but I am wearing my Building 7 shirt. It is appropriate for today's show because we're going to talk about 9/11. As we get right up on that date, there's always going to be shows talking about, well, I don't know. I mean, talking about the most important event in my lifetime, I would say. This was my generation's Kennedy assassination, you know. Everybody knows where they were when Kennedy happened. And everybody knows where they were on 9/11. I mean, everybody knows where they are with Kennedy except for George H.W. Bush. He just can't remember. He couldn't remember where he was. He remembers where he was on 9/11, though. George H.W. Bush was in Washington, D.C. Not W. W was in the White House. No, W was in Florida. But his son was theoretically, president in the White House. But the dad, George H.W. Bush, was in Washington, D.C. having a meeting on behalf of the Carlyle Group with the Bin Laden family, which is totally, I'm sure, just a real normal coincidence that happens when your son, the President of the United States,
check it out,
is in the middle of a huge calamity, a catastrophe even, and the perpetrator is the son of the person that you're having a business meeting with. But I'm sure that's just totally organic and authentic, and nothing unusual happened there or anything. Oh my God! Look, here's the deal. 9/11 is now eligible to go drink alcohol on the 21st anniversary. And I mention that because it's tempting to be dismissive of that. And to say, oh, well, that's ancient history. That happened a long time ago. It's, we've got COVID now, and we've got all these things to worry about that, we've got all these other wars, and 9/11 is in the past. Yeah, it was weird, it was terrible and everything, but it's not, it shouldn't be our focus. Well, I disagree wholeheartedly. Because to not understand 9/11 is to not understand what's going on right now. And when you dig into the lead up to 9/11, the day itself, especially the aftermath of that, like what happened as a result of these attacks by 19 Arab hijackers with boxcars, which, is laughable, but what came in the wake of that is one of the more important parts. It's kind of hard to rank what's the most important lessons to learn from 9/11. They're all important, but I'd say that there are some policies that sprung from that are currently in place today. The Patriot Act, and things like that, and what the Patriot Act brought us, that never went away. Just take your shoes off when you go through security at the airport temporarily. It's for your safety. That's what the Germans used to say, right? It's for your safety. Are you still taking off your shoes to this day? Yeah, it's not temporary. Temporary government actions are never temporary. And speaking of Germans, one of the things I'm going to do in this episode is I'm going to go through my Global Control book. If you don't have this book, it's worth the purchase. And obviously, I wrote it, and so I make money from it. So it sounds like a sales pitch, but which it is, I guess, in some respects. But just a nice, succinct one book where you can have that covers quite a few topics. And one of the topics I'm going to get into is 9/11, but I wanted to have the book right out here so I could read some of the quotes from it. If you're unfamiliar, the Octopus of Global Control book came out in 2017, the first book, and the format of the book is unusual in that it has quotes from over 500 different people that had an interesting take or were involved in some of the most important events of our for our history, not necessarily our lifetime, because some of the quotes are from, over 100 years ago, but these people saw things and were explaining it in a way that didn't wind up on the nightly news. So I compiled this into a book, and I think it's going to be important to sort of reference these quotes and reference these stories because they're still relevant. It's like I said, it's 21 years later. But unlike your cell phone, which is obsolete, the quotes and the talking about 9/11 is still as relevant today as it was back then. So speaking of Germans, I want to read this. This is from Joseph Goebbels. And I think it's important that we start off with this. When talking about 9/11, you have to understand the big lie. And this is from Goebbels. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and/or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus, by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. See, that's the reason why I speak at anarchist conventions. That's the reason why I wrote a book with Erwin from Acapulco. Because the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. And the state is the biggest problem we face. And so many of these things originated from state control, state media, official government sources say, people close to the president's thinking said, an anonymous intelligence agency source said, all this stuff. These are all, it's all state-sanctioned propaganda. And if you don't understand state propaganda, you'll never understand 9/11. And if you don't understand 9/11, you'll have a harder time understanding COVID. You might figure it out. But if you know 9/11, if you know how that worked,
check it
if you
out.
understood the flow of information, if you understood what was working in the background, how these guys were doing it, how they plotted years in advance for this,
grenade out.
Then you'll have a hard time understanding the COVID situation because they, not to mention there were some of the same overlap, same players involved in this thing, but just the same idea, the same style, the same process. That this takes years of careful planning in advance. You have to have the right people, and by right people I mean sociopaths of the highest order. But you have to have them in place. You have to have full buy-in by them, whether that comes because they have no problem working against humanity, or they're being blackmailed into doing it, or they know the consequences of getting on the wrong side of these people equals death, or maybe all the above. So it's important for us to understand the role of propaganda, state-sanctioned propaganda, media. I've made this comment before, I'll say it again. Whether it's JFK, 9/11, or COVID, one of the common denominators there is that the media is always driving the getaway car. And 9/11 is no different. In fact, it was on full display. We saw some straight-up lies from the media. We saw them parrot talking points. Hell, the intro to this podcast has Garrett Utley from NBC News saying a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that. He couldn't believe that the words were coming out of his mouth. He had to qualify it with, if you can believe that. The answer is, we can't believe that. You shouldn't believe that. If you do believe that, you have to have a good talk with yourself. Good hard look in the mirror. Why are you believing these things? Why are you believing these obvious lies? I mean, think about it. Maybe you just have never questioned this, but if you think that a hijacker's passport was found at the foot of an FBI agent blocks away from the World Trade Center crash site, that it was in his pocket or briefcase or whatever, that he was on an airplane that flew into the Twin Towers and exploded in a huge fireball. And that passport flew out of his pocket, out of the fuselage of the plane, through the wreckage of the building, through the fireball, through the dust cloud. Blocks flew in the air, blocks away, and happened to land at the foot of an FBI agent in perfect condition. You are functionally retarded. Sorry. I'm not sugarcoating any of this. If you believe that story, you're dumb. Don't be dumb. Okay, stop it. They depend on people being dumb. Stanley Milgram, the Milgram experience, said 80% of people do not have the ability for critical thinking. That lie works on 80% of the people. Not this audience. This audience is way past that. We're not tolerating any of that stuff. So I wanted to do a different episode on 9/11. Everyone does the same thing. I think I've done the same thing. I've done some episodes on it, and I want to mix it up. I want to come at it from a different angle, an unusual angle. To be fair, a very unusual angle. But I think it's time that we recognize that there's a little bit more to this world than what we see with our own eyes, or hear with our own ears, or smell with our nose. And there's a world beyond our five senses. And I've mentioned this before. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the term remote viewing, remote viewing is when a person can be a person is in one location and can see things that are happening in a different physical location, a different time zone, time frame. They can see things that you shouldn't normally rightly be able to see. And it sounds woo-woo, fake, and make-believe the first time you hear it. I completely recognize that. It looks like somebody doing bullshit magic tricks. Okay. But hang with me on this, because I think, look, the CIA spent a fortune and decades trying to figure out how to weaponize remote viewing. The SRI, Stanford Research Institute, deeply involved in this. Pat Price, Pat Price. Oh God, I forgot all the names. There's a few that came out of this group. And they were Ingo Swann, of course. Ingo Swann, best known for remote viewing Jupiter in advance of the Voyager missions that were sent out there. And he was looking. They had the story behind Ingo Swann remote viewing Jupiter is crazy. Where they met him and they black bagged him, and took him, put him in a car, and then took him on a helicopter and flew him somewhere, and then down some elevator shaft that just kept going and going and going, and then they ended up in some room. They took the hood off and they said, "Okay, we want you to," they paid him. He agreed to it, and he was being paid for it. He wasn't necessarily being kidnapped. He was doing this, of his own free will, but there were some sort of we can't let you know where we're taking you sort of thing. So they took him down and made him remote view, or didn't make him, they asked him to remote view a coordinate. Now the way remote viewing works, and I'm no expert, but I know a little bit, is that they don't say, "We want you to remote view Jupiter and tell us what you see." What they do is they give him a set of numbers, and these numbers mean nothing to anybody except that the person that has put these numbers out, that the person that has designated these numbers is the one that's in charge of the experiment. That person knows we're going to be looking at Jupiter and we're going to be looking for certain things, and that's what's going into these numbers, and I'm putting the energy of Jupiter into these numbers, and now I'm going to give this guy Ingo Swann, he's going to say, what's my target? And they're going to write down 8 numbers, which aren't coordinates or geolocations or anything like that. You just write this down, and he's going to look at that, and then from that, through his training and psychic abilities. I don't even really know if psychic abilities necessarily plays into this, because you can teach somebody to remote view. But anyway, I'm going into the description of remote viewing for a specific reason, because we're going to get into what the guy saw that remote viewed 9/11. And it's important to understand that it's very easy to dismiss this stuff focus. And when you watch them on video doing remote viewing, it probably won't set your mind at ease either, because it looks like they're making it up, of course. You know, they're sort of like pondering and staring and drawing on dry erase boards, and they're drawing things, and they don't really, and they're talking it out, and they're all by themselves, video camera, just the viewer, and dry erase board, and the target number, and they've got that written, and then they just go and they say what they want to say. You know, this is what I see, this is what I feel. A lot of it's feeling, it's intuitive. They're going through different, you know, there's a format to it. And like I said, I'm no expert at it. I've watched enough of this. I've read enough about it. I know it's real. It's 100% real. It sounds crazy. It sounds like it shouldn't be real. But look, I will say this: anybody that just reflexively says that's impossible, well, my follow-up question would be: have you ever taken psychedelics before? If the answer is no, if the answer is remote viewing is impossible, have you ever taken psychedelics? No, then I'm not interested in what you think. Because if you have taken psychedelics, then you understand that there is a world beyond the world that you see. And just because you can't do that right now in this sober, quote, normal life, doesn't mean that it can't be done. So if you want to be dismissive of remote viewing because you think it sounds crazy, I get it. It does sound crazy. And wait till you watch it being done live. It looks crazy too. Okay? Nothing about that is going to make you feel like, oh, this is legit, until you watch enough of these guys do these things. Now, the best in the business have about a 65% accuracy rate. That's the number that Pat Price was told to get to. Once he got to a 65% accuracy rate, or maybe that was Ingo Swann. I think it was Ingo Swann. That's what it was. It was Ingo, because that's when they said, well, once you get to 65%, then let us know, then we need you for this mission. He got to 65%. They said, great, we got a mission for you. So it's not perfect. It's not. But in order to mitigate that, you have multiple remote viewers do the same target that don't know that they're doing the same target. And then what you do is you compare and you say, well, what did you guys all what was the common denominator that you got? What did you get here? You know, some people will say, I saw this, and they felt something differently, but they all saw the same building. They saw a building. They didn't know where it was. One guy said, I feel like it's in an urban area. The other guy says, well, it's a big building, and I don't know where it is. But so you find the common denominators there. And so with 9/11, years later, like 15 years later, Farsight Institute had been they're begging them, please remote view 9/11. And I guess Courtney Brown, the head of Farsight Institute, said, well, like we can't just do that right away, because the remote viewers will know what the target is. So they had to wait years and years and years. In fact, not only that, I think Courtney said publicly and maybe even privately to the team, we're never going to remote view 9/11. So these guys had no reason to think they were remote viewing 9/11. I guess he'd been very clear that we're not going to do it. So when they finally did do it, the viewers didn't have any reason to believe that they were on a 9/11 assignment, because as far as they knew, it was sort of like, it's too on the nose. We're just gonna stay away from that one. So there's two videos, and I want to credit Dustin, one of our listeners, with sending me the videos. Now when he sent them to me, I said I didn't know about this, but the truth is, after I got done watching both of them, I was sort of half right. I did know about the first one. I just didn't know there was a part 2. So he sent both of them over, and I watched part 1. I was like, oh, I don't think I've seen this. And I watched part 1. I'm like, oh no, I have seen this, but I watched it again. What I didn't realize was that there was a part 2. I watched that again, or I watched that for the first time, and it's wild. And the links for those are going to be in the show notes, so that you can go and watch them yourselves. They're each 2 hours, and it's Dick Algire in Hawaii and Daz Smith in the UK that's doing this. And Courtney Brown is the head of Farsight. He's the one that basically said, you know, he's sort of the guy who says, these are your coordinates. And so they're remote viewing literally on opposite sides of the world. And the results that they get, and I think they gave him 8 different targets, so it wasn't all just New York City downtown, Lower Manhattan on the morning of September 11th. There was a variety of places, and I wanted to go over this because it was a really good reminder of what was happening on 9/11. Some of this stuff, I gotta be honest, I kind of forgot it was happening. So, and look, everybody does 9/11 episodes. So why not do one that's a little unusual? And that's what this is going to be. It's going to be weird, okay? But hang with me because it's worth it. And when you watch these videos, after you listen to this episode and you say, well, maybe I'll watch one of those videos. Watch them. It'll blow your mind. Even if you think this stuff is like hocus pocus. And again, I fully understand that. Okay? It's such an obscure and unusual talent that most of us don't have, or at least don't know that we have. I think maybe inherently we all have this, and that it gets suppressed by school and parents, our own self-doubt, and nobody teaches you how to do it, really. And I think that these skills are maybe dormant in a lot of people. And that in some are just better than others at accessing this and practicing, and you have to sort of be like very clear-headed. And I guess from what I've read, the toughest part is like not dragging your own personal biases into this. You know, you're trying to stay as objective as you can. So I wrote down a ton of notes on this, and some of them are a little bit, you know, sort of out of, not necessarily in the proper order. So I'm going to do the best that I can with this and just go off of some of the notes. But ultimately, this is like an advertisement for Farsight Institute in a sense, because I want you to watch the videos. Watch the videos and tell me what you think. Okay. For those of you, like, Dick Algeier is the guy in Hawaii. He's like a newscaster in Hawaii for like a long time. You know, like he just worked at the news station. He was like the anchor guy, and had a deep interest in this, and wound up working for like a long time, to over a decade, to improve his skills and get to the point where he's turned into one of the best remote viewers out there. So he's one of the guys that's doing this. Daz Smith, you can watch, and they, you know, they draw on the erase board and they kind of get their minds into this right space, and they start feeling things, and I don't know the checklist that they're going through in their heads, but they come out with some interesting things. So some of the keywords that they use were infiltrated attack. Okay, you know, we hear about this 9/11 was an inside job. Sort of. 9/11 was an inside and outside job. We'll get into that in a second, and when we get done with this, I'll explain why I think that this assessment of 9/11 that these guys saw, what the things that they saw, I think this is the most accurate version of 9/11 that I've seen. It's not to say it's all perfect, and of course there's room for discussion and debate, and these, and even Courtney Brown, the head of Farsight Institute, will say remote viewing doesn't prove anything. It just tells you what these guys see. Proof, you know, you go find that on your own. But so knowing that, and hearing what these guys say about an event that they're viewing that they don't know is 9/11. They never know it's 9/11, right? So I think I think at some point you probably have to figure it out, right? So they're talking about an infiltrated attack. They're talking about powerful group. Grenade out! And the reason when I bring these up, it's because both viewers came to the same conclusions, or they're not allowed to come to conclusions, but they both saw the same things. Okay. Powerful group giving instructions to 3 other groups. So there's one group, and they were giving instructions to 3 other groups. And in each of these 3 other groups, there were between 4 and 8 guys in each of these groups. All men. Some were military, some were not. There was a scenario where there was a tape, like one of those They described it as if you're on an aircraft carrier and you're launching planes, and you want to know what planes you have available and what planes have launched. You'll have like a big table.
Throwing
and they'll
flash!
physically move like a plane out there, or they'll, sort of like you can, like generals would do, right? So they're sitting around this big table, and there's generals and there's VIP. And described it as very trusted people. The people that are in this room all can be trusted, and so they're making moves, they're making decisions, they're talking about things. They're very focused on what's going on in this control room. Some more of this. There's
Grenade!
They said that this command center that they're in, this control room command center, is covered by a Faraday cage and camouflaged through electronic cloaking. And big table, big decisions being made at this table. Okay, so sort of like you can take that. So team one was 4 to 8 males, well trained, working as a unit, and they were outside and mobile.